Musical and dramatic presentations of the epics were infinitely superior to reading or chanting them by oneself. Hello and welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host Liam, aka Himvar, and today I'll be doing a spoiler review of M.A.R. Barker's The Man of Gold. The Man of Gold is a 1984 science fantasy novel. It reads much more like fantasy, but the science cannot be ignored either. 1984 novel, book 1 in Tekumel, or Empire of the Petal Throne, book 1. There is a board game, a tabletop role-playing game, and setting of the same name. And there is one novel actually released shortly after this one, and 3 released years later. Though none of those are sequels. This is essentially a standalone novel. So Tekumel as a setting was one I was not really all that familiar with before reading this, and it's one I'm not really greatly familiar with either, but now. But Barker began working on it in the 1940s, along with constructed languages in the world. He is a linguist. So in the Imperium of Solyanu, 2 priests espy an imperial messenger. The younger of these priests is Harsan, the older Zarin, who has made a looking glass to view things at a distance more clearly. They are at the monastery of the Sapient Eye of Thumis. Harsan was adopted and raised by the Pechoi, which are insect people, pretty much, like giant praying mantis, essentially. We pretty much quickly get an idea that Harsan works with text and language, and also we learn some cosmology and history around Thumis, Gruga, and Ku'u. We also get some ideas of how the administration runs, how society is organized, some more cosmology of the world of Tekumel, which is also the name of the series, many alien-sounding words as well. While there are obvious constructed words, the author also shows a deft and more adroit hand with language, both in linguistic knowledge and using it to effect. I pretty much actually really appreciate it. I really think it's done well. We also have another character, Lady Ale. She is of some import as a companion. We get things like her with, like, nudity is open among some, for example, like the peasantry, among anyone in certain parts of the empire, ranging from heavily revealing clothes to not revealing anything in your clothing, pretty much. The book can be quite sexual at times, though. Along with many and varied priests, those of change and those of stability are the 2 main categories. And there's several gods in those pantheons, normally with like opposing ones, right? There's a change deity that follows the same domain as a stability deity. They're just kind of like opposite parts of that in a sense. So we get much ideas of culture, though, and it feels very filled out, very fleshed out, which makes sense from its tabletop role-playing game setting perspective, but also makes some sense for epic fantasy, which this is, again, definitely science fantasy tinged. We do get some other point of views, mostly for politicking and intrigue. Not a lot of these. There are a couple moments where a third-person omniscient comes through, but we're mostly always with Harsan. But while the world is alive, Harsan is not particularly interesting as a character. This was largely fine by me. He works with ancient texts in their language. He's a philologist, essentially, and he does have some interesting ideas going along with that. The world does get a good amount of world building and exposition. It's well done enough, mostly in conversation, but much seems forced, kind of, to give the reader more of an idea of the lore, or maybe just to share it because Barker liked it, than just naturally being there. Though plenty of it does feel natural as well. There is action, not much to start, and it is spread out. It often comes quite suddenly, but it's not the most action-filled book. Definitely some Southern Asian and very heavily Southeast Asian inspiration in this pulpy read if it wasn't immediately obvious. So it does get some points for that, where it's very much not European-inspired, really, at all. Harsan at times is pretty much powerless as a character and tossed to and fro. This is a bit frustrating. That being said, he rarely acts much on his own at all, mostly in the parts where he says he shouldn't do something. It'd be easier to blah blah do this or whatever, etc., and he does it anyway. But those are minor things in the grand scheme of things. At one point he is referred to as a pawn being moved against his will. In an in-world analog is used. It's not quite chess reference, but anyway, and that is pretty accurate. But he's pretty flat character overall, and most of the other characters are pretty flat as well, with a little exception, but not a lot of movement going on with those exceptions. So we also have, like, with Ale, we also have Tlayesha. Women in this world don't seem in a normal social setting to be as privileged as men, but they're pretty close to as privileged. just not quite there. And while normally at the dictates of their clan, they can renounce, so pretty much whoever's in charge of their clan controls them, they can renounce this actually and kind of go clanless and then marry any number of husbands that they so choose. But then it's a double-edged sword, seeing that these women would then not get any clan support or aid. So there's definitely an interesting ending with these two that was a little, I don't know, it kind of felt kinky, to be honest, but it could also just be, I mean, how do I say it? It's like polygamous in a sense, which is actually pretty broadly a thing, or was mostly in the past in like the grand scheme of human cultures, but still was interesting. Anyways, so it definitely works as standalone with room for more, and there are some really good parts of it that I really enjoyed. I like I said, I think the language aspect is done really well. There is Soyanu, but you really don't get much of the language at all, which apparently it is actually a rather fleshed out, constructed language, as my pal Logan Kearsley says. So I'll take his word for it. But overall, I think I'll probably read the next book at some point. This is one of those books where I was like not really sure how I was feeling about it while I was reading it, but my thoughts on it have become more positive in the months since I finished it. So I am glad I read it. And, well, Charles Stanford recommended it to me, so I'm glad of that too. Thanks, Charles. So anyways, Liam from Liam's Lyceum, an interesting one, again, from the 80s that is not really talked about much. What's also interesting, actually, and I'll mention this more in my review of Magician, but Magician by Raymond Feist is a couple years older than this, but it's heavily taking influence from this world. So anyways, Liam from Liam's Lyceum. I'll catch you next time.